A bombshell new royal book reveals shocking new details about King Charles and Prince William's fury at Prince Harry. This is from Robert Hardman. He is widely regarded as the sort of horse whisperer of the palace. You know that if he has included something, it's come via official channels, which is why his reporting is so interesting. We've seen this book, and it's just the update of the book, get prominent front page coverage of both the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday in recent days. And the main headline, why the palace was so appalled by Harry's TV stitch-up and tasteless plea that came next. In a new edition of his peerless biography of the King, royal author Robert Hardman reveals astonishing new details of Prince Harry's behaviour. Brittany, so this biography is Charles III, the inside story. But obviously the update is very interesting because we've had this Prince Harry interview with the BBC and it went down very badly.
Fight anymore. As I said, life is precious. I don't know how much longer my father has. He won't speak to me because of this security stuff. But it would be nice to reconcile.
It was a horrible interview on Harry's part. It's in such poor taste. The timing was on his niece's birthday. It was just so horrifically awful. It was the outcome was already always determined. There was just no way for him to get his security back. His complaints were just completely delusional, conspiratorial, so many different things. And so to go on the BBC and make the statements that he did was just, again, pretty abhorrent on his part, that his communications person, either suggested this or went through and got this interview for him. I mean, shame on them. They should have not have put him up there. He was, I think, too emotional in some ways, and it's best for him in so many ways just to keep his mouth shut.
So let's get into some of these revelations, Brittany, because what Robert Hardman does is paint this interesting picture of an incredibly difficult time for Prince Harry. And he writes, with great sadness, he had resigned from Centre Bali, the Lesotho charity he had co-founded 20 years before. He had stepped down in solidarity with trustees who had left after falling out with the chair of the charity's board. Days later, he appeared in Britain as his legal team took his long-running case against the British government to the Court of Appeal. There was no need for him to appear. Many legal experts could see no reason for his presence in court, scribbling on post-it notes and sipping water as his barrister pressed his challenge to a Home Office decision to remove his right to automatic police protection in the UK. He seemed to be pitch-rolling ahead of what was likely to be a humiliating court decision was how the King's team regarded his short visit to London, especially as there was no prospect of seeing his father, who was away on a state visit to Italy. So, Brittany, they saw right through him.
They did, and it's not a surprise, again, that Harry just decides to go down these paths, desperate for attention in so many ways. And really, when you think about it, because I went to the courthouse in April during that time to get some pictures. I was trying to avoid jet lag, and I was like, well, this is like an easy spot, and it's always good for me to practice getting pictures in an environment where a royal is, because they move very quickly and those sorts of things. And so, I mean, it was just basically a circus. He was just there to get his picture taken and leave. He didn't offer anything, and maybe he just wanted to give, a sad face to the judge to attempt to move him in one direction or another. But Harry, he just didn't really have any point of being there. He was there just, again, to serve himself and perhaps distract from his father's big state visit to Italy, which happened, just, I think, a week or two before Pope Francis died. So it was a very, very big deal, an important event, especially as his father is still recovering and in treatment for cancer. But for Harry, everything has to be about himself and this insane need for a ridiculous level of security that, in my personal opinion, he doesn't really need.
Well, of course not. And Robert Hardman goes on, yet after hearing he was coming to London, the King had still offered him accommodation at Buckingham Palace during his stay. Once again, he said no, presumably because the palace is still so unsafe. and ended up staying in a hotel, said a member of staff, struggling to hide the sarcasm in light of what the Duke did next. Because we know, Brittany, that in reality, the reason he didn't stay at the palace was because he was planning this interview with his father. Sorry, speaking about his father.
Yes. And I always thought as well when it comes to Harry not staying in whatever offered accommodations he is given, it's because it's in highly structured and highly overseen places like Buckingham Palace, St. James's Palace. Because what the palace did, which was very, very clever, is remove the option of Frogmore Cottage, where Harry and Meghan had a lot more leeway into who they invited onto the property, who they were speaking with, recording, getting pictures, those sorts of things. And so to avoid that, the palace is like, okay, you can stay at Buckingham Palace. Well, there's a lot of people who work there, a lot of people who are there. You can't just do whatever you want. You're under supervision of somebody. And so I feel like that's why Harry is not a fan of staying at the residences, is because he doesn't get the accommodations that he wants. But also, yeah, he was probably preparing for an interview to complain about what happened with the court case, even though the outcome again was pretty much predetermined from the jump. This was pointless. But Harry, of course, it's all again about serving his master Meghan and himself in many ways, I gotta say. He just does whatever Meghan tells him, and he has this vendetta about security. So
Robert Hardman talks about the interview where Harry, of course, said that it felt like a good old-fashioned establishment stitch-up, talking about the result in court before, and I think this is missed all the time, alluding gravely to his mother's death. Some people want history to repeat itself, and that's pretty dark. For the foreseeable future, Britain would remain too dangerous for his children. There was a wistful but jarringly tactless note at the very end when the Duke was asked about reconciliation. I don't know how much longer my father has. He won't speak to me because of the security stuff, but it would be nice to reconcile. Prospects for that, however, had just receded further. Within royal circles in Britain, some were frankly appalled at his glib choice of words about the king's health. Well, on the one hand, he claimed his court battle was over. He also repeatedly called on Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper to step in. The king's legal jeopardy dilemma therefore remained unresolved. As long as his son was pursuing his ministers on a judicial question in his courts, the king, as a fountain of justice, could not risk any private discussion for fear that Prince Harry might air some of the details or his version of them in public. So there, Brittany, we have confirmation of the fact that reconciliation is impossible for as long as Harry continues on this futile security battle.
yes. And you have to think too, his kind of response of, oh, we don't want history to repeat itself, is so incredibly ridiculous, because his mother, obviously it was kind of connection with her BBC Panorama interview. She was a bit paranoid by what Martin Bashir had told her. And so she had stepped away from her Scotland Yard protection. And if she had them, she'd still be alive. But that was her choice, done under the auspices, you could say, of inaccurate information coming from the BBC. And so when it comes to what happened in particular with his situation, like, his father has to step away because Harry is suing the government, and he is dragging his father into this, trying to drag ministers into this, compromising the integrity of the court system in order to serve himself and his ideas. And it's so incredibly arrogant as a royal, and it's so incredibly, I think, a disservice to the memory of his mother. And it's a outcome that Harry should have anticipated. When he left, he was told, hey, you might not get security anymore. And he just went ahead and went anyways. And then he's whining and pouting and complaining about it. Well, the simple answer is, if you want it back, you maybe have to become a working royal again. This is not incredibly difficult. But Harry, thinking that somehow any of this is going to reconcile him with his family, that any sort of plea on the BBC is somehow going to help him in his relationship with his family, is just delusional. It's insane. It makes no sense. But that is Harry. He lives in this bitter, angry world that he has created. And I don't think he can see reality anymore.
No, he can't. But Robert Hardman went on, Brittany, in this book, in this new version of the book, royal staff had noticed something else too.
A brand new update to Robert Hardman's royal biography has dropped, and it's packed with some pretty explosive details about the fallout between Prince Harry and the palace. Hardman isn't just any royal writer, he's known for having access to the palace's inner circle, so when he shares something, it usually means it came straight from trusted sources. The book reveals just how furious King Charles and Prince William were over Harry's BBC interview. Not only was the interview seen as totally out of line, but the timing was also terrible. It landed on his niece's birthday and came across as tasteless and self-serving. In the interview, Harry complained about his security being taken away, claimed there was some kind of establishment stitch-up, and even dropped a shocking line about not knowing how much longer his father has left. That, insiders say, deeply upset the family and made reconciliation seem further away than ever. Hardman paints a picture of Harry at a very low point. Stepping down from a major charity he helped start, showing up unnecessarily at court to fight his security battle, and seemingly using those appearances to grab attention. Palace staff believed his visit to London wasn't about family or duty, it was about optics and trying to sway public opinion. Even when Charles offered him a place to stay at Buckingham Palace, Harry refused, preferring a hotel, which sources suggested was because he wanted more freedom to plan his interview without palace oversight. The book also highlights how damaging Harry's words were to his father, especially since Charles, still undergoing cancer treatment, has to be extra careful. Because Harry is suing the British government, the king can't risk private talks with him that could later be twisted or leaked. That means reconciliation is basically impossible while Harry continues this legal fight. And the most jarring part? Harry tried to link his situation to Princess Diana's tragic death, saying he feared history repeating itself. But critics point out that Diana made her own decisions about stepping back from royal protection under false pretenses, and drawing that parallel to his own battle was not only misguided but seen as disrespectful. At the end of the day, Hardman's update makes one thing clear: Harry's obsession with security, his public complaints, and his choice of words about his father have only widened the rift. Within the palace, there's a sense that Harry is caught in a bitter, almost delusional cycle, and until he stops this legal crusade, any hope of repairing his relationship with the king is off the table.
And I know, Brittany, you had noticed this. It was starting to feel a little more than coincidental that when the king was on important business overseas, the Duke of Sussex would suddenly emerge from his hard-won privacy to make a high-profile public appearance. In March 2023, as the king was embarking on the first overseas state visit of his reign to Germany, Prince Harry had unexpectedly and unnecessarily flown to London to watch the preliminaries of one of his various court cases. When the king was beginning his 2025 state visit to Italy, Harry had done the same again. A few weeks later, as the king flew to Canada, his younger son made a surprise appearance in Shanghai at a conference on sustainable tourism. Only a cynic could possibly detect a pattern there, observed one courtier with mild amusement. So, Brittany, again, we've picked up on this for a long time, but the fact that the palace is now going public with this is what's significant, I think.
It very much is, Dan, especially considering that one of the Harry's peace offerings at this so-called peace summit was, here, I'll share my diary with you. And so you can know when my events are. Acknowledging that Harry tends to want to interfere in the publicity that other members of his family get by putting out something so that he can get a little bit more press attention than they do. It comes from this inferiority complex that Prince Harry has, and this failure of Harry to acknowledge the fact that, hey, he's not going to be king, and he left. And so Harry could have created for himself a really wonderful life in the United States if he had really worked towards trying to have a career. Instead, he wants to be a cosplay royal. He tries to piggyback constantly off his family and the publicity that they receive in order to try and make him feel like he's still royal again. And the simple answer is, if he wants to be royal, then he needs to live in the UK and go back to the royal family. But that route has been firmly closed in many ways. And so he has to do these constant, pointless, unnecessary, really sort of stupid looking stunts to get attention. And he just should let it go and find a real big boy job. He's tried this cosplay royal routine. It does nothing for them. Stop surfing, go get a job. That's my advice to
Very
Harry.
well put. Get a haircut, get a reel. It's interesting though, Brittany, is Robert Hardman is pushing this idea that actually Charles doesn't talk about Harry, even in private. He writes, there was one person, however, who seemed wholly unconcerned by the latest Sussex grievance. Even in private, the king showed no interest in discussing the matter. People are always saying that he must be so upset by the Harry business, said one member of his inner circle. But when you have all of that is going on in his world, you don't have time to agonize over things beyond your control. Back channels remained open, however. There was much excitement when the king's press communications secretary was spotted having a drink with the latest Sussex media manager during a London visit in July. Some commentators even hailed it as a peace summit, to the surprise of palace insiders who had regarded it as a courtesy call. So again, Brittany, so many digs in there, right? It's very much the same thing as William. We don't even think about Harry anymore. You know, we've moved on. That is going to be so galling for him. Do you note that the little dig from Robert Hardman, the latest Sussex media manager, you know, because it's just one in a long line of people. And actually, this wasn't really significant. It was just a courtesy call. There is no peace coming. Interesting, I thought.
Yeah, very interesting. And I really hope that there is no peace coming. What I've always said, and I still believe that's to be true, is that if Charles wants to have a personal reconciliation with Harry, I'm all for that. I won't stand in the way of that. But when it comes to the institution of the monarchy, Harry and Meghan are gone. And I feel like that schism should be like firmly established. But that Charles doesn't even want to talk about Harry, it's both dismissive and I think a reflection of how deeply he has been hurt by them. They constantly throw barbs at him and they say, oh, you know, we don't understand why they're so upset, is what Harry and Meghan seem to say all the time. It's like they attack the royal family and then claim the victim status and don't know why nobody wants to talk to them. I mean, it's so obvious, but I imagine Charles is just immensely hurt by Harry, the lies Harry has told about his childhood and everything. And I'm sure Charles sometimes sits there going, well, we did go bike riding as a family. What is Harry talking about? And you can't reason with crazy. And I feel like that is the place where Harry is right now. He is completely delusional. He has no grasp on reality. And so you almost have to keep him away because that's the only way you can manage things. And again, I hope for the sake of Charles and his health that maybe he has some sort of relationship with Harry. Again, a private one, not anyone that is related to the monarchy as an institution. But that remains to be seen. But Harry is the one who firmly shut that door. Harry only has himself to blame. He can't blame anybody else here. It's not the media. It's not the British press. It's not the courtiers. It's not anybody but himself and his wife. That is who Harry has to blame.
Brittany, what's interesting too is that this book also looks at how a cancer diagnosis has impacted Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and some really strong guidance that actually her faith has been strengthened. Now, they're not too specific about exactly, are they talking about a religious faith? Are they talking about spirituality? But this has been something that has, I have to be honest, within royal circles, long been craved for, because we know that William, who is going to be the head of the Church of England, just really has no interest in religion and in faith. So this is very interesting from Robert Hardman. The headline, How Cancer Inspired Kate's New Spiritual Awakening. And he writes, since her appearance at the Wimbledon Tennis Championships in July 2024, there had been a gradual cautious return to regular duties for the Princess of Wales. Her cancer journey through 2024 had been very different to the King's, not least because of her age and the impact on her 3 young children. One consequence of her cancer diagnosis appeared to be a keener interest in matters of faith, and that only seemed to develop further in 2025. Asked how much further, a Kensington Palace insider noted in her own words, she's talked about the recovery process in her mind, body, and spirit. So I point you in that direction. It has indeed become a telling phrase. If the princess's sense of the spiritual seemed to be solid and perhaps even deepening over time, there remained no discernible shift in the prince's appetite for religious introspection. There wasn't one. Still no change, notes the insider. So that's interesting, Brittany, because again, reading between the lines, Robert Hardman's very careful in terms of how he writes these things. But it seems like Catherine has had either a religious or at least a spiritual awakening as she went through her cancer battle, but that hasn't influenced Prince William, who as king, I repeat, will be the Church of England. What do you make of it?
I mean, if Catherine has found a deeper sense of faith through her cancer journey, I think that is a marvelous thing. Obviously, if you are facing death, you obviously question things. You want more information. You're trying to figure out, okay, what does this all mean? Because you look at life very, very differently. And so I feel like if Catherine has found a deeper sense of religious faith, I think that's awesome. Spirituality is a little bit different, but I think that's great that she's obviously thinking about those things. And what's interesting is when it comes to William, because one of the things I have thought, because I've never really gotten any sort of sense that he has much faith, really, that he goes to services and those sorts of things. But beyond that, we don't hear him speaking in religious terms or being as devoted as Her Majesty the Queen. If Queen Elizabeth didn't go to church on Sunday, that was a national news story. William only seems to go when, it's sort of required from where he's at or he's with his family, something to that effect. And so when it comes to being the head of the Church of England, I would not be surprised if, as king, William decides to change that in the future and decides not to be head of the Church of England. That would be an interesting change, and one definitely that is, I think, something to look for in the future of William's reign. But if Catherine is able to subtly influence him, as wives are able to do, we may see a change at some point in the future. But if cancer and can't do it, then I wonder where things go in the future for sure.
Yeah, very true. It's a huge question, and I know that lots of people within the royal household will be thinking, "Oh, come on, Catherine, drag him along to church, get him there," because all of a sudden it becomes very, very difficult if the head of the Church of England is not going to be the monarch. Also in this book, Brittany, and I really wanted to go into this, what the Queen really thought of Donald Trump. The headline, critics said he was rude to her, but the truth is much more unexpected. In a new edition of his peerless biography, Robert Hardman reveals astonishing new details about the royals.
So here's what's really interesting. Robert Hardman's updated royal biography suggests there may be a bit of a pattern with Harry's behavior. Every time King Charles is off on some big state visit, Germany, Italy, Canada, suddenly, Harry pops up somewhere unexpected, like in London courtrooms or even at a Shanghai conference. Palace insiders are now openly hinting that this isn't just coincidence, but Harry's way of trying to steal the spotlight whenever his father is front and center. It ties back to what's being described as Harry's inferiority complex. Instead of carving out a meaningful career in the US, he still seems desperate to play the role of cosplay royal, shadowing his family's public moments to grab attention. And yet, insiders say Charles doesn't even talk about Harry anymore, not even in private. While back channels technically remain open, there's no sign of reconciliation. Courtiers even brushed off one supposed peace summit as nothing more than a polite courtesy call. The message is clear: Harry has only himself to blame for the distance. But the book isn't just about the Sussex drama. It also highlights how deeply Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis has changed her outlook. Sources say she's found a stronger sense of faith or spirituality during her recovery, and that this inner strength has been guiding her. William, however, doesn't seem to share that religious interest, something that raises eyebrows since he's set to be the future head of the Church of England. Some even speculate he might rethink that traditional role when he becomes king, unless Catherine's quiet influence nudges him closer toward faith. And if that weren't enough, Hardman also teases some surprising new details about Queen Elizabeth's real thoughts on Donald Trump, hinting that her true feelings might not match the rude to the Queen headlines we've all seen before.
And I am glad about this one, Brittany, because it's something that has percolated for quite some time, this idea that in some way the late Queen Elizabeth II wasn't a fan of Donald Trump. Craig Brown included some revelations in his book, but I've always thought this is far, far too easy. It's a narrative that the mainstream media and the left want. But Robert Hardman really blows it to pieces in this book. So he writes, a popular press narrative, especially resurrected by Trump critics on both sides of the Atlantic, has taken root that Mr. Trump was rude to the Queen. The charges are that he had kept her waiting on the greeting dais by arriving late, and that he had walked in front of her during the inspection of the Guard of Honour in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle. Members of the royal family who were actually there deny this, saying that the Queen was not remotely put out. Trump did nothing wrong at all. He arrived exactly on time. It was the Queen who had come out early because she wanted to check the dais and the steps, which were always a concern at that stage of her life, says one senior member of her staff. You have to remember that this was her first big event since the Duke of Edinburgh's retirement from public duties the year before. She wanted to get it right. It was the same inspecting the troops. All through her reign, it would be the Duke who escorted the visitor to do the inspection, and she hadn't done it before. And Trump did the right thing. The visitor is always invited to walk first, and she had to gesture to him to go in front. The anti-Trump crowd were determined to find a faux pas. There wasn't one. One of the late Queen's staff recalls that the conversation flowed as the monarch served Mr. Trump and his wife Melania tea in the Oak Room. The two leaders had a genuine rapport, not least because they had some things in common. Both had Scottish mothers and both had significant landholdings in Scotland. It wasn't just small talk. They discussed policy matters. He was super charming, on his best behaviour throughout, says the royal staffer. One thing that struck everyone, including the Queen, was the president's energy. He would bound up and down the stairs. When Joe Biden came 3 years later, we had to put him in the creaky old Edwardian lift. The visit had been scheduled to last 20 minutes, but went on for 40. It also meant that when Mr. Trump returned to the proper state visit the following year, there was a link. It's always easier when you can begin by saying, hello again, Mr. President. There was a connection there, says the palace source. No doubt about that. So, Brittany, to me, that sounds absolutely categorical. There was no issue between Trump and the Queen. So can we please put this rubbish to bed?
Oh man, I hope we can, because when that initial report came out about Trump being rude, I just didn't totally believe it. He has an immense level of respect for the royal family, and he is someone who does take protocol rather seriously in many ways, especially when it comes to the British monarchy. He would be immensely respectful of that. And Trump in personal interactions is known to be quite charming. You might like him or dislike him, but there's a reason why he was running around Hollywood for many years and had The Apprentice and other shows on SNL, is because he has this charming piece to himself. And so I think he had a marvelous time doing the state visit. I think it was an immense honor for him. And I think him and the Queen, like, they weren't best friends by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure he treated her with an immense level of respect, and I'm sure he will do the same for the upcoming state visit next month as well. And so I look forward to that, and I'm excited to see it. State visits are always fun, but I think it's really nice to see a little bit of a walking back of that narrative, because again, I never thought it was true, and it's good to see some clarity on the matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's actually very clear. As you say, Brittany, we've seen how deferential Trump has been with Prince William, with King Charles, even with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, with whom his politics most certainly do not ally in any way. And so the idea that he would have been anything but completely charming with the late Queen, a woman who he just had so much respect for, has always beggared belief. And I am glad that Robert Hardman hasn't gone down the easy path here, because the easy path is to keep going with this narrative. And actually, he's gone and he's asked not just the Queen's staff members, the late Queen's staff members who were there that day, but also members of the British royal family who were there. And there's nothing. There's nothing. So I'm very, very glad that finally history is being put straight on this matter. And Brittany, much more analysis where it comes from your channel, the Royal News Network, which is absolutely well worth subscribing to on YouTube for all of the latest analysis, not just of the British family, but of monarchies across the globe.
This piece pushes back on the long-running story that Queen Elizabeth II disliked Donald Trump. Robert Hardman's reporting, backed by palace staff and royals who were there, says the rude to the Queen narrative is wrong. The headlines claim Trump kept the Queen waiting and walked in front of her during the guard inspection, but witnesses say Trump arrived on time. The Queen had actually come out early to check the dais, and protocol invited the visitor to go first. In short, there was no faux pas. According to those present, the meeting went smoothly. The conversation flowed over tea in the Oak Room, and the two had a genuine rapport. They even shared things in common, Scottish family ties and land in Scotland. Staff described Trump as charming, energetic, and respectful. The scheduled 20-minute visit ran 40 minutes because it was going well. Hardman checked with multiple staffers and family members and found nothing to support the rude story. The piece argues the tabloids and critics picked the easy, sensational line instead of the truth. This correction matters because it shows how quickly a viral narrative can take hold, even when eyewitnesses say otherwise. The hosts here are relieved, they didn't buy the original story and welcome the clarity. If you liked that quick debunk, smash that like button and subscribe to Royal News Network for more straight talk royal analysis. Hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive, and tell us below, did you believe the original story, or did this clear things up for you? Watch next, our breakdown of how the press builds royal narratives.